I lay there on my bed, letting my mind fall victim to a plague of sickening thoughts of the past month. Why did this have to happen to me? No. Why did it have to happen to Jordan? He never did anything to deserve being pulled into such a mess. I've got nothing going for me, so why not me? Why Jordan? My mom would probably be gone for the rest of the day, so I had the house to myself as I let these thoughts occupy my mind. I've never really been the kind of person to hang out with a lot of people, but then again, I haven't really had many friends to begin with. Out of the small list of friends I did have, Jordan was the one I trusted and was closest to. We didn't have much in common. I came from a dysfunctional family, whereas he came from a well-doing and caring family. My parents were divorced and rather neglectful towards me. My dad hated me, despite hardly being around to see me. My parents were always fighting with each other, while Jordan's parents were loving and almost the polar opposite of mine. Jordan even had better luck in his social life than I did. He was well known at school and always showed kindness towards others. He was a 4.0 student and at the top of our class. I was the kid who got left in the back of the crowd, remaining unnoticed by the others. As different as we were, Jordan and I were always there for each other. We were practically as close as brothers. My story starts on a regular afternoon, hanging out with Jordan around town and walking to the park. We liked to talk about girls, video games, sports, and we often threw out an odd joke or two. Time flew by pretty fast and Jordan realized it was getting late. I checked my watch to see that it was nearly 9 in the evening. Jordan was worried that his parents would be concerned about the time. My mom wouldn't even notice I was gone. That is, if she was even home at all. We started back to Jordan's house and he told me I could spend the night since it was pretty late already. He said that his parents probably wouldn't mind. We could feel the cold wind hitting us in the face, so we zipped up our jackets and jammed our hands into our pockets and walked on. Jordan's street was nearly a block or two away by now. He suddenly stopped walking and turned to face the dark alleyway to our left. He stood there, frozen, staring blankly into the darkness in front of him. I glanced down the alley, but saw nothing. He had once tried to scare me before doing something similar, but this time there was something strange about him. "Yeah, nice try, Jordan. It ain't gonna work this time, you dick." He didn't budge. I started to feel worried and looked around to see if anyone was following us. "Jordan, you alright?" I asked. Still, no response. He stood there in a paralyzed position. His view was fixated on something, as if some entity in the darkness was staring back at him. I took another look down the alley. I could see the road on the other side lit by the moonlight, but the center was filled with an eerie darkness. I thought there might be a wild animal of some sort, and Jordan caught a glance of its glow in its eyes. I still saw nothing, and I didn't want to get any closer. "Jordan, stop it, man. This isn't funny anymore," I said. No reply. I gave him a solid smack to the face and he came around, which gave me the biggest sigh of relief. "I thought there was something wrong with you. Don't scare me like that again," I said. He looked at me with confusion. "Scare you like what?" he questioned. "You stood there staring blankly into space like you'd gone mental," I said. "I must have zoned out, but whatever. Let's get moving, or we'll be even later," he replied, then remained silent for the rest of the walk. I couldn't help but look behind me every few minutes, seeing if we were being watched or followed by whatever he might have seen in that alleyway. We moved onwards until we reached his house. His mother and his dog Axel greeted us at the door. When we got inside, both his parents questioned him on his lateness. "We lost track of time, but we're alright," Jordan explained. I headed up to his room while he asked his parents if I could stay the night. As I waited alone, my mind started to flood with questions about what had happened earlier. Jordan came up the stairs a few moments later, carrying an inflatable mattress and some blankets for me to sleep on. It was about 10 p.m. when we both got into our beds and fell fast asleep. We woke up the next morning at 7:30, half an hour before school started. We rushed to get ready, skipping showers and breakfast, and ran out the door. On our way to school, I noticed something different about Jordan just by looking at him. He seemed quieter than usual and slightly bewildered. "What's up, Jordan? You look like you're about to burst out and cry like a little girl," I jokingly prodded. Normally, he would have laughed at something like this, but there wasn't the slightest change in his expression. He solemnly said, "Nothing's the matter. I would like to walk in peace for once without having to listen to you." His gaze remained in front of him. He made no effort to make eye contact with me. He had never snapped at me like that before. Not to me, not to anyone. I tried not to dwell on it too much, but I knew something had changed in him, and something was definitely wrong. Once we had gotten to school, it was 9:12 a.m., so we went to the reception area to get a late pass. We would usually make up something if we were ever late. Alarm clock broke, or maybe we caught or missed the wrong bus, but this time we took our late slips without giving an excuse. We got to class, turned in our late slips over to the teacher, and took our seats. Everything was going fine so far. I turned and noticed Jordan staring blankly into space again, just like last night. He turned towards me, with that damned blank expression on his face again. I tried to break his stare by waving my hand in front of him, but he didn't move an inch. I moved back and forth, he moved with me, not letting his eyes break contact with mine. Then it happened. His cold, indifferent expression turned into a menacing, sadistic grin. He was staring directly into my mind, filling me with an extreme feeling of fear and panic. The room faded away. The students, teacher, desk, windows, the damn flickering fluorescent lights at the front of the class. They faded into darkness, and all that was left was Jordan, his eyes boring straight into my very being. I felt numb all over and began to sweat. It was a cold, nervous sweat, and I began to shake as adrenaline rushed through my body. Then, I realized what was wrong. This wasn't Jordan I was looking at. This thing, whatever it was wearing Jordan as clothing. I was waiting for the flesh of his face to tear open along the seams, for his body to burst open under the sheer pressure of whatever was living inside. A dull hum began to drone in my ear, becoming louder and sharper until it became a well-defined, repetitive ring. Something moved in the darkness, and the walls began to emerge from a dense fog and closed in on us. The movement in the distance became our classmates, rustling through their backpacks and beginning to stand up. I recognized the ringing as the sound of the school bell. Jordan, or whatever this thing was, snapped back to the center of his seat and faced the front of the class, wearing a calm expression on his face. I tried to look around, but my body was still tense and paralyzed by fear. Didn't anyone else notice what just happened? Jordan stood up and walked out of my vision, leaving me staring at the window behind where he was sitting. "Hey man, what's the matter? Class is over. Let's go get lunch," he said from behind me. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the window, watching blurred objects move outside. The shock slowly dissipated and I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, and my palms were cold and sweaty. I stood up slowly, still feeling lightheaded. I took a moment to look around the classroom. It was empty. The teacher had already wiped the board and left. I walked out of the room and looked both ways down the hall. Jordan was nowhere in sight. I began to grow anxious as I walked along the corridor. Who or what was this being that possessed my best friend? I refused to accept that Jordan was consciously choosing to act like this. One moment he's the person I've known for years, and the next, I find myself fixed on the cold, uncaring eyes of another being. It made me sick just thinking about it. I walked out of the main building and felt the warm sun on my face. A cool, refreshing breeze passed by, and I took a moment before continuing to the lunch area. I sat down at a bench, trying to forget about earlier, and wondered where Jordan was. He came out of the office building carrying a lunchbox. He sat down opposite of me. My mom came by and dropped off a lunchbox. "Let's see what we got here," he said, as he opened the box. He pulled out 2 Subway sandwiches and 2 cans of Sprite. "Here's yours, man." He handed me a sandwich and a soda. "Everything alright? You look a bit pale." I opened the pop can and took a long drink, which alleviated the uneasiness in my stomach. I opened the paper wrapping around the sandwich and took a bite. A mass of lettuce, grated carrots, and a meatball held together by a blob of melted Swiss cheese fell out of the side of the sandwich. It landed on the paper wrapping on the table, and thankfully not my lap. Jordan burst into laughter, pointing at my face. I had smeared a good amount of mayonnaise across my upper lip and chin, attempting to save the contents of the sandwich. I took a napkin from in the lunchbox and wiped my face. Seeing him laugh had made me feel that the worst had passed, and things were taking a turn for the better. We finished our lunch and tossed the paper wrappings and tin cans into the rubbish bin. As we turned to walk out of the lunch area, Christian, one of our classmates, stood up from a bench near us and lost his balance. One foot remained in contact with the ground as he spun around, arms outstretched, attempting to grab onto whatever he could to stabilize himself. He latched onto the sleeve of Jordan's jacket, pulling them both down to the ground. While Christian struggled to gain his bearings, I reached down to give Jordan a hand. He stood up on his own and brushed off his pants, leaving me with an empty, outstretched hand. He started walking away from where we were standing, not saying a word. I felt unnerved by his silence. Oh God, it's happening again, I thought. "I'll be just a moment, dude," he said as he turned around to look towards me before entering the restroom. I sat back down at the bench and waited for him. Looking over to my right, I saw Christian had managed to make it back to his feet. He headed off towards the seniors' common room. I snickered to myself at the thought of getting in there. What a joke. Me, the unpopular kid, being let into the common room? A few minutes passed by, and Jordan still hadn't returned. I stood up and headed towards the restroom to check on him. I thought of calling out his name, but figured it'd be too awkward with others standing around. No one was at the urinals, so I checked the stalls. They were all empty. Jordan must have slipped out when I wasn't looking, but why hadn't he come back to the tables? I walked back outside and looked around, finding only a group of preppy teens chatting with each other, but no Jordan. I felt nervous as I wondered where he might have gone and what he could be doing. I heard a scream from the hallway to the right, and Jordan's girlfriend came running out crying with 2 of her friends following her. I ran down the hallway and saw the doors to the common room close shut. This wasn't good. I opened the doors and was stunned by what I saw. Christian was lying on the floor, knocked unconscious with a small pool of blood forming under his head. Jordan knelt above him, relentlessly driving his fists into the side of his classmate's head. I looked up from the unconscious body, being senselessly beaten, and every muscle in my body froze. Instead of seeing a furious look on his face, I instead witnessed the familiar, malevolent grin accompanied by a gleeful laugh. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I turned around and reached for the door, wanting no more of this. My hand missed and I fell to the ground, my vision blurring around me. Why won't this just all go away? That was my last conscious thought before I blacked out completely. I woke up on a bed in the infirmary. The nurse must have heard me moving and came over to check on me. After making sure that I was alright, she said that I was better off than the other boy. The other boy? I thought. Oh, that's right. It was Christian. What happened slowly came back to me. I asked what happened to him. The nurse said that the fight was broken up by a teacher and an ambulance was called to take Christian to the hospital. After the nurse checked me out of the office, I looked at the clock on the wall and saw that it had been an hour since school was released. I walked home, this time by myself. It had been 3 weeks since that incident. Jordan returned from his suspension a week ago, and things seemed to have returned back to normal, apart from the occasional rumor about the fight. I went over to Jordan's house on Sunday. I mentioned that Christian was due back from recuperation the next day, but we didn't talk about the fight between the two of them. When I arrived at school that Monday, I saw Christian getting dropped off by his dad. He still had a lot of bruising and was wearing a neck brace and a few small bandages. Jordan didn't show up though, most likely wanting to avoid Christian on his first day back. The bell rang and started the start of the first period. Students started to head towards their respective classes. I was on my way to English when I noticed a group of people forming around a section of loggers. There were a few faculty members trying to keep students at a distance from whatever had happened. Another fight, I thought. I hadn't heard anything going on before, though. I got closer to the crowd and I couldn't make out what was going on. I turned around in the opposite direction and saw Christian sitting on a bench with a teacher kneeling in front of him, holding him reassuringly by his shoulders. He had a catatonic look on his face, and I heard the teacher speaking softly in a calm voice to him. I turned back and tried bending down to see if I could get a glimpse of what had happened, but the area was still too cluttered with people. I got a classmate's attention in front of the crowd and asked him what had happened. "Someone broke into Christian's locker and did some real messed up stuff," he responded. I pulled him out of the crowd and looked him in the face. "Tell me exactly what had happened." "I don't know, man. I only saw it for a moment, alright? Someone shoved a bunch of bloody animal parts and stuff in his locker. Man, it's messed up," he said as he frantically stumbled out of the crowd and away to a classroom. Think of how this all sounds. Your best friend begins acting possessed, then has a psychotic breakdown and bludgeons a classmate's face to a bloody mess. He ends up absent on the day that they find a pile of bloody, dissected animal bits in the locker of said classmate. I took off out of the school gates without hesitation, going straight for Jordan's house. I ignored the burning in my legs as I ran, thinking only what had happened. I had no clear idea as to why I was going to Jordan's, but something clicked in my mind and I immediately felt that he had something to do with the gory mess in the locker. I was getting close. I ran up the dirt path from the road towards his house. The front door was left wide open. Anxiety struck me like a brick wall as I walked closer, becoming increasingly distressed. I took a step through the doorway and heard a splash under my foot as it landed on the wooden floor. I looked down to see that I had plunged my foot into a puddle of blood. My tongue caught in the back of my throat and my heart pounded faster. The puddle led across the floor into the kitchen. Part of me wanted to run away that very instant, but I continued to walk slowly towards the kitchen, following the dark red path. The cutlery drawer was pulled out and the handles and knives were streaked with blood. I grabbed a knife, fearing what monster may be lurking in the house. The path of blood led out of the kitchen through another door into the hallway. As I followed it to the base of the staircase, a nauseating stench in the house became more apparent. I held the knife out in front of me with both hands, turning around to see if anyone was there. The house was silent and I stood there for about a minute. As I turned back to face the staircase, there was a loud thud at my feet, and something warm splattered against my face. There at my feet was a decapitated, skinned animal carcass, about the size of a dog. It was still wet with blood. I heaved, but nothing came out. I saw movement at the top of the stairs and quickly looked up. A figure stood there, silhouetted by the glare from the window behind it. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It had pointy ears sticking out of the top of its head, and its long arms extended down to its feet. It just stood there, watching me. I couldn't manage to take my gaze off of it, nor could I move. I was paralyzed and began to lose sense of time. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it. Eventually, my eyes adjusted to the brightness from the window. I could start to make out the distinct features of this thing that stood before me. Its arms had more joints than a regular human's and appeared to limply dangle there, as if the creature made no effort to use them. It had the muzzle of a dog, and its upper part was covered in animal fur. I was still clueless as to what it was. My eyes soon became completely adjusted to the lighting, and I gradually became filled with horror. This wasn't some sort of otherworldly beast. No, it was assembled in this world. I could see the seams of torn flesh where one arm met with another, the clear difference in skin tone. I had no interest in wondering where the additional limbs came from. The furry hide of a canine was draped over the front of this thing's bare human chest. Blood dripped down from it until it reached a pair of dark red stained jeans. I recognized the face of what was once the dog named Axel, now positioned over this thing's face as some sort of mask. I knew who it was, but there was no way I would ever accept it. I couldn't. I began to panic, and this must have also been noticed by the beast. It started to make a growling sound at me and arched its back, preparing to pounce on its prey. I was that prey. I broke eye contact with it and realized I was still gripping the knife that I had took from the kitchen. The beast leapt from the top of the stairs, and I raised my arms. There was a gashing sound, and I was knocked back on the ground. The weight of this monster was bearing down on me. The mask made out of Axel's head became detached from the wearer's face, and I could clearly see now that it was Jordan. I felt a warm liquid run over my hands. His body slowly became relaxed, and he made no effort to fight back. I looked down to see the knife penetrating Jordan's gut. I looked back at his face. It was Jordan looking at me this time, not the monster that had possessed him before. He smiled at me, not a sadistic grin, but a calm smile of relief. His eyes slowly closed and he laid his head on my chest, becoming completely motionless. The blood was still rushing over my hands. I didn't know what was going on anymore, but I couldn't stand the pressure. I pushed the body off of me, leaving the knife where it had entered his abdomen. I walked out of the house in a state of pure shock. It was as if all that had happened suddenly vanished from my mind, and my only initiative was to begin walking to my house. I got home and took off my blood-soaked clothes, then hopped into the shower. I watched Jordan's blood wash off of my body and flow down into the drain. After I got out of the shower, I put on a clean pair of clothes and threw my bloody ones into the trash can. I walked out of the bathroom and down the hallway towards the room, turning the message machine on by habit as I passed by it. I froze in the doorway of my room when Jordan's voice began to play on the machine. "Hey, I know you just left, but I'm glad you came over to visit. I'll be by your place tomorrow, maybe around 5 in the afternoon." The machine beeped, and the automated voice announced that the message was sent around 8 p.m. last night. I must have been on the way back home from Jordan's house when he had called. I glanced over at the clock. It was 4:58 p.m., 2 minutes away from when he said he'd stop by. I sat back on my bed, blocking the violent memories of what had just happened, retaining the only thought that Jordan wouldn't be coming back. I wanted to cry, but I didn't have the energy to do so. I stared at the clock on the wall, watching the second hand tick closer to the next minute. I began to immerse myself in thoughts of hanging out with Jordan. We were at the park laughing at something, maybe a stupid joke that one of us told. As the minute hand reached closer to the hour, the dream world where Jordan was still alive faded away as I drifted back to this sad and lonely reality. Here I am now, at the end of my story. I lay here alone in my house and my best friend wiped from my life. What now? Who will I hang out with over the weekends? I have no one that I can trust to tell my secrets to anymore. No one to care enough to listen to what I have to say. I close my eyes and roll over, hoping that when I wake, this will all have just been a nightmare. There's suddenly a loud, powerful slam from the front door. The sound resonates down the hallway and through the walls of the house. This is followed by a slow scratching sound along the wall, getting closer and closer to my bedroom door.
I've always hated the smell of gun oil. It clings to everything it touches, soaking deep into the fibers of my clothes, the lining of my backpack, the coarse hair on the back of my hands. Yet, here I am, kneeling on the cracked linoleum of our mudroom, a Remington 308 laid across my thighs, and the stench of gun oil sharp in my nostrils. The early morning light barely scratches at the edges of the blinds, dim and gray like the belly of a dead fish. My dad, Frank, is in the kitchen, clattering around with the coffee pot and mumbling under his breath. Today we're heading up to the woods of northern Michigan, same as we did every year before Leah, before we lost her. I can't help but feel the old scars throbbing as I load bullets into the magazine. It's been 10 years since that hunting trip, the one that tore my family in two before and after. Before, when Leah's laughter was a constant soundtrack to our lives. After, when every silence was filled with her absence. We were just kids back then. I was 10, Leah was 8. It was supposed to be a typical hunting trip, one of those bonding experiences Dad was always talking about. But things went wrong. We got separated from Dad somehow. At one minute we were following him, at the next we were lost. The dense woods closing in around us. Dad says when he found me, I was huddled under a fallen tree, my eyes wide, my body frozen. All I could mutter through chattered teeth was, "Dogman." It was only later, after the search parties had combed through every thicket and hollow, that they found her. What remained of Leah was barely recognizable, but the evidence of a brutal mauling undeniable. The authorities concluded it was likely a bear attack, but Dad, he never accepted that explanation. He had seen the tracks, too large and oddly shaped for any bear. As I load another round, the memory flashes, unbidden and unwelcome. Large, hairy, clawed hands reached out towards us, impossibly big, grotesque in their form. Yet, the rest of the creature eludes me. A shadow just beyond the edge of my recall, leaving me with nothing but fragmented terrors and Leah's haunting, echoing screams. My mind blocked most of it out, a self-defense mechanism, I guess. For years after that day, sleep was a battleground. I'd wake up in strange places, the kitchen floor, backyard, even at the edge of the nearby creek. My therapist said it was my mind's way of trying to resolve the unresolved, to wander back through the woods searching for Leah, but all I found in those sleepless nights was a deeper sense of loss. It took time, a lot of therapy and patience I didn't know I had, but the sleepwalking did eventually stop. I guess I started to find some semblance of peace. I have mostly moved on with my life. The fragmentary memories of that day are still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, but they don't dominate my thoughts like they used to. I just finished my sophomore year at Michigan State, majoring in environmental science. As for Dad, the loss of Leah broke him. He became a shell of himself. It destroyed his marriage with Mom. He blamed himself for letting us out of his sight, for not protecting Leah. His life took on a single, consuming focus. Finding the creature that killed her, He read every book, every article on cryptids and unexplained phenomena. He mapped sightings, connected dots across blurry photos and shaky testimonies of the Dogman. But as the 10th anniversary of Leah's death approaches, Dad's obsession has grown more intense. He started staying up late, poring over his maps and notes, muttering to himself about patterns and cycles. He's convinced that the Dogman reappears every 10 years, and this is our window of opportunity to finally hunt it down. I'm not nearly as convinced. The whole Dogman thing seems like a coping mechanism, a way for Dad to channel his guilt and grief into something tangible, something he can fight against. But I decided to tag along on this trip, partly to keep an eye on him, mostly because a small part of me hopes that maybe, just maybe, we'll find some kind of closure out there in the woods. I finished loading the rifle and set it aside, standing up to stretch my legs. I wiped my greasy hands on an oil rag, trying to get rid of the smell. The early morning light is starting to seep into the room, casting long shadows across the floor. Dad comes out of the kitchen with 2 thermoses of coffee in hand. His eyes are bleary and tired. "You ready, Ryan?" he asks, handing me a thermos, his voice rough from too many sleepless nights. "Yeah, I'm ready," I reply, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We load our gear into the truck, the weight of our supplies and weapons a physical reminder of the burden we carry. The drive from Lansing across the lower peninsula is long and quiet, the silence between us filled with unspoken memories and unresolved grief. The drive north is a blur of highway lines and the dull hum of the engine. I drift off, the landscape outside blending into a haze. In my sleep, fragments of that day with Leah replay like scattered pieces of a puzzle. I see her smile, the way she tugged at my sleeve, eager to explore. The sunlight filters to the trees in sharp, jagged streaks. Then, the memory shifts, darker, disjointed. Leah's voice echoes, a playful laugh turning into a scream that pierces the air, the crunch of leaves underfoot as something heavy moves to the underbrush. I see a shadow, large and looming, not quite fitting the shape of any creature I know. Then, something darker creeps into the dream. Something I've never allowed myself to remember clearly. Before I can see what it is, I wake up with a start as the truck jerks slightly on a round patch of road. Dad glances over. "Bad dream?" he asks. I nod, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, the remnants of the dream clinging to me like the cold. "Yeah, just thinking about Leah," I manage to say. As we drive, Dad attempts to bridge the silence with small talk. He asks about my finals, my plans for the summer, anything to keep the conversation going. His voice carries a forced cheerfulness, but it's clear his heart isn't in it. I respond when necessary, my answers brief, my gaze fixed on the passing scenery. The landscape changes as we head further north, from flat expansions to rolling hills dotted with dense patches of forest. It's beautiful country, the kind that reminds you how vast and wild Michigan can be. But today, it just feels oppressive, like it's closing in on us. We finally arrive at the cabin, nestled deep in the woods, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the surrounding trees. The place hasn't changed much since the last time I was here, a relic from another time filled with the echoes of our past. I can still see Leah running around the porch, her laughter ringing out into the forest. Dad parks the truck and we step out into the crisp air. The smell of pine and damp earth fills my nostrils. We start unloading our gear, the tension between us palpable. "Let's get this inside," Dad says, his voice gruff as he hefts a duffel bag onto his shoulder. I nod, grabbing my own bag and following him to the cabin. Inside, it's a mix of old and new, the same rustic furniture, but with new hunting gear and maps strewn across the table. Dad's obsession is evident in every corner of the room, a constant reminder of why we're here. As we unpack, we exchange strained attempts at normalcy. He talks about the last cryptid sightings he's read about, his eyes lighting up with a fervor that both worries and saddens me.
Did you hear about the sighting up near Alpena?
He asks, laying out his maps on the table. Yeah, you mentioned it, I reply, trying to muster some enthusiasm. Do you really think there's something to it? Dad's eyes meet mine, and for a moment I see a flicker of doubt, but it's quickly replaced by grim determination.
I have to believe it, Ryan. It's the only thing that makes sense.
We finish unpacking, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing minute. I step outside to clear my head, the cool air a welcome relief. The sun is starting to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. I can't shake the feeling of unease.
You can take the upstairs room,
Dad mutters. His voice is strained, trying to sound normal, but it's clear the weight of the past is heavy on him. I nod, hauling my backpack up the creaking stairs to the small bedroom that I used to share with Leah. The room feels smaller now, or maybe I've grown too much since those innocent days. I unpack silently, setting my things aside. The bed is stiff and cold under my touch. As I settle in, I can't help but glance at the corner where Leah and I would huddle together, whispering secrets and making plans for adventures that would never happen. I push the thoughts away, focusing on the practicalities of unpacking. After settling in, I go back downstairs to find Dad loading up a backpack with supplies for our hunt. The intensity in his eyes is palpable, his hands moving with practiced precision. I know this routine. It's one he's perfected over countless solo trips since that fateful day.
We'll head out early,
he says, not looking up from his task.
Gotta make the most of the daylight.
I nod, though unease curls in my stomach. I'm not just worried about what we might find, or not find, out there. I'm worried about him. Each year, the obsession seems to carve him out a bit more, leaving less of the Dad I know. The morning air is sharp with the scent of pine and wet earth as Dad and I head into the deeper parts of the forest. The terrain is rugged, familiar in its untamed beauty, but there's a tension between us that makes the landscape feel alien. Dad moves with a purposeful stride, his eyes scanning the woods around us. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush seems to draw his attention. He's on edge, and it puts me on edge too. As we walk, my mind drifts back to that day, 10 years ago. I can almost hear Leah's voice echoing through the trees, her high-pitched calling as she darts ahead.
Catch me, Ryan.
I remember how the sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on the ground. Those memories are so vivid, so tangible. It feels like I could just turn a corner and see her there, waiting for us. Dad suddenly stops and kneels, examining the ground. He points out a set of tracks that are too large for a deer, with an unusual gait pattern.
It's been here, right? I'm telling you, it's close,
he whispers, a mixture of excitement and something darker in his voice. I nod, though I'm not sure what to believe. Part of me wants to dismiss it as a grief-fueled obsession, but another part, the part that heard Leah's scream and saw something monstrous in the woods that day, isn't so sure. As we continue, Dad's comments became increasingly cryptic.
You know, they say the Dogman moves in cycles, drawn to certain places, certain times, like it's tied to the land itself.
He muses, more to himself than me. His fixation on the creature has always been intense, but now it borders on mania. We set up a makeshift blind near a clearing where Dad insists the creature will pass. Hours drag by with little to see, but the occasional bird or distant deer. The sun rises higher into the sky, casting long, slender shadows to the dense canopy. I shift uncomfortably in my spot, the forest floor hard and unyielding beneath me. My eyes dart between the trees, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything to break the monotony. Dad, on the other hand, remains steadfast, his gaze fixed on the tree line, as if he can will the Dogman into existence by sheer force of will. A bird chirps nearby, startling me. I sigh and adjust my grip on the rifle. I glance over at Dad. "Anything?" I ask, more out of boredom than genuine curiosity.
Not yet,
He replies, his voice tight.
but it's out there. I know it.
I nod, even though I'm not sure I believe him. The forest seems too quiet, too still. Maybe we're chasing ghosts. As the sun begins its descent, the forest is bathed in a warm, golden light. The air cools, and a breeze rustles the leaves. I shiver, more from anticipation than the cold. The long hours of sitting and waiting are starting to wear on me.
Let's call it a day for now.
Dad says, finally, his voice heavy with disappointment.
We'll head back to the cabin, get some rest, and try again tomorrow.
I stand and stretch, feeling the stiffness in my muscles. We pack up our gear in silence and start the trek back to the cabin. The walk is long and quiet. The only sounds are the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. Dinner is a quiet affair, both of us lost in our thoughts. I try to make small talk, asking Dad about his plans for tomorrow, but it feels forced. We clean up in silence. After dinner, I retreat to the small bedroom. The fatigue from the day's hike has settled into my bones, but sleep still feels like a distant hope. I lie down, staring at the ceiling, the room cloaked in darkness, save for the silver moonlight creeping through the window. Downstairs, I hear the faint sound of Dad moving around, likely unable to sleep himself. I drift into sleep, but it's not restful. My dreams pull me back to that fateful day in the woods. Leah's voice is clear and vibrant, her laughter echoing through the trees. She looks just as she did then, bright-eyed and full of life, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she runs ahead of me.
Come on, Rye. You can't catch me.
She taunts, her voice playful and teasing. I chase after her, but the scene shifts abruptly. The sky darkens, the woods around us growing dense and foreboding. Leah's laughter fades, replaced by a chilling silence. I see her ahead, standing still, her back to me.
Leah?
I call out, my voice trembling. She turns, slowly, her eyes wide and filled with fear.
Ryan, you have to remember,
She says, her voice barely above a whisper.
it wasn't what you think. You need to know the truth.
Leah's words hang in the air, cryptic and unsettling. Before I can respond, she turns and starts running again, her fingers becoming a blur among the trees. Panic rises in my chest and I sprint after her, my feet pounding against the forest floor.
Leah, wait.
I shout, desperation lacing my voice. The forest around me seems to close in, the trees towering and twisted, shadows dancing menacingly in the dim light. I push forward, trying to keep her in sight, but she's too fast, slipping away like a wisp of smoke. Suddenly, there's a rustle, a flash of movement in the corner of my vision. Leah screams, a sound that pierces through the heavy silence. It happens too quickly. I can't see what it is, only a dark blur that snatches her up.
Leah!
My voice breaking. I stumble, falling to my knees as the forest spins around me. My heart races, and the terror is so real, so visceral, that it pulls me back to that awful day, the one that changed everything. I jolt awake, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I sit up, wiping the cold sweat from my forehead
as I try to steady my breathing. The room is still dark. The shadows cast by the moonlight seem to flicker and dance on the walls. My heart is still racing from the nightmare, the echo of Leah's scream lingering in my ears. As I struggle to calm down, the floorboards outside my room creak. The door opens slowly, and I see the silhouette of my dad in the doorway, a bowie knife in his hand, his posture tense.
Dad, what the hell are you doing?
I whisper, my voice shaking. He hisses, holding up a hand to silence me. I heard something moving around in the cabin. Stay quiet. I swallow hard, my mouth dry. I glance at the clock on the nightstand. It's just past 3 a.m. The cabin is silent, the kind of deep, oppressive silence that makes every small sound seem louder. I can't hear anything out of the ordinary, but Dad's expression is deadly serious. He motions for me to get up, and I do, moving as quietly as I can. My heart is racing, a mix of lingering fear from the dream and the sudden sharp anxiety of the present moment. Dad leads the way, stepping cautiously out of the bedroom and into the hallway, the knife held ready in front of him. We move through the cabin, checking each room in turn. The living room is empty, the furniture casting long shadows in the dim moonlight. The kitchen is just as we left it, the plates from dinner still drying on the counter. Everything seems normal, untouched. We finish our sweep of the cabin without finding anything amiss. The silence is heavy, punctuated only by our soft footfalls. I can see the tension in Dad's frame, his grip on the knife unwavering. After checking the last room, we pause in the dimly lit hallway, the air thick with unspoken questions.
There's nothing here,
I say, my voice low.
Are you sure you heard something?
He looks at me, his eyes searching for something in my face. I heard a growl, deep and close. It was right outside the window.
Maybe it was just an animal outside, a raccoon, something,
I suggest, although the certainty in his voice makes me doubt my own reassurance. No, it wasn't like that. It was different. He insists, his voice tense. I nod, not wanting to argue, but the seeds of worry are planted deep. The look in his eyes sending a chill down my spine. It's not just fear, it's desperation. The kind of desperation that comes from years of chasing shadows and finding nothing. I can see the toll this hunt has taken on him. The way it's worn him down, turned him into a man I barely recognize. We head back to our rooms. As I lie down, my mind races with thoughts of my dad. I can't help but wonder if he's losing it, if the years of grief and guilt have finally pushed him over the edge. Dad wasn't always like this. Before Leah's death, he was the kind of father who took us fishing, helped with homework, and told terrible jokes that made us groan and laugh at the same time. He was solid, dependable, but losing Leah changed him. The guilt twisted him into someone I barely recognize, someone driven by a need for answers, for closure, that may never come. I try to sleep, but my thoughts keep me awake. I can hear Dad moving around downstairs, probably pacing or double-checking the logs. His paranoia has become a constant presence, and I don't know how to help him. I don't even know if I can help him. I don't even know if I can help him. The next morning, the sunlight filters weakly through the cabin windows, casting a pale light that does little to lift the heavy mood. I drag myself out of bed, feeling the exhaustion of another restless night. Dad is already up, hunched over his maps at the kitchen table, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Morning," I mumble, rubbing the sleep from my eyes and pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Did you sleep at all?" He shakes his head, not looking up from his notes. "Not much. I couldn't stop thinking about what I heard last night." I sip my coffee, trying to shake off the remnants of my nightmare.
Maybe it was just an animal, Dad. We're deep in the woods, after all.
He finally looked up, his eyes intense. "Ryan, I know what I heard. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else.
I sigh, not wanting to argue. Okay, fine, Dad. What's the plan for today?
We're going back out. I found some tracks yesterday, and I want to follow them, see where they lead.
I nod, feeling a mix of apprehension and a resignation. I can see how much this means to him, how desperate he is for any kind of lead.
All right, let's get packed and head out.
We spent the morning preparing, loading up our gear and double-checking our supplies. Dad is meticulous, going over everything with a fine-toothed comb. I try to match his focus, but my mind keeps drifting back to Leah and the dream I had. Her words echo in my head, cryptic and unsettling. You need to know the truth. We set off into the woods, the air crisp and cool. The forest is alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, but it all feels distant, like background noise to the tension between us. Dad leads the way, his eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the tracks he found yesterday. As we walk, I can't help but notice how erratically he's acting. He mutters to himself, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out at us. His grip on his rifle is tight, his knuckles white.
Dad, are you okay?
I ask, trying to keep my voice steady. He glances at me, his expression unreadable.
I'm fine, just focused.
He stops frequently to examine the ground or the bark of trees, pointing out marks and signs that seem meaningless to me.
Look at this,
He says, crouching down to examine a broken branch.
see how it snapped? That's not a deer or a bear. There's something bigger, stronger.
I crouched next to Dad, squinting at the broken branch. To me, it just looks like a regular broken branch, the kind you see all over the forest.
I don't know, Dad, it just looks like a branch to me,
I say, trying to keep my voice neutral. Dad's eyes flicker with frustration.
You're not looking close enough. It's the way it snapped. Too clean, too deliberate. Something did this.
I nod, not wanting to argue. Okay, sure, but even if you're right, it could be anything. A storm, another hunter. His expression hardens.
I know what I'm looking for. This is different.
I sigh, feeling the weight of the past and the tension between us pressing down on me. Dad, I had a dream last night about Leah. The words hang in the air between us, heavy and fraught with unspoken emotions. Dad's eyes widen, and he straightens up, his entire demeanor shifting.
What kind of dream? What did you see?
His voice is urgent, almost desperate. It was strange. We were in the woods, like we are now, but everything felt different. Leah was there, running ahead of me, laughing. Then she stopped and told me I needed to know the truth, that it wasn't what I thought. Dad grabs my shoulder, his grip tight.
What else did she say? Did she tell you anything specific? Anything about the creature?
I shake my head, feeling a chill run down my spine. No, that was it. She just said I needed to know the truth, and then she was gone. Dad's grip on my shoulders tightens, and his eyes bore into mine with a mixture of desperation and hope.
Ryan, you have to try to remember. Think hard. What did the creature look like? Did you see anything else?
I pull back slightly, uneasy with his intensity. Dad, I told you, I don't remember. It was just a dream, a nightmare, really. My mind's probably just mixing things up. He let go of me and runs a hand through his hair, looking frustrated and lost.
Dreams can be important. They can hold memories we've buried deep. Please, try to remember. This could be a sign, a clue.
I rub my temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. I've tried, okay? I've tried for years to piece together what happened that day, but it's all just fragments, like pieces of a puzzle that don't fit. The dream, it felt real.
but I don't think it's telling me anything new.
Dad's face falls, and he looks older than I've ever seen him. He turns away, staring into the forest, as if it holds all the answers. As we make our way back to the cabin, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows to the trees. The air grows colder, and I shiver, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Dad is silent, lost in his thoughts, his face drawn and haggard. Back at the cabin, we unload our gear once again in silence. Dad disappears into his room, muttering something about going over his notes. I decide to explore the cabin, hoping to find something that might help me understand what's going on with him. In the attic, I found a box of old family photos and documents. As I sift through the contents, I come across a worn journal with Dad's handwriting on the cover. Curiosity gets the better of me, and I open it, flipping through the pages. The journal is filled with notes and sketches, detailing his obsession with the Dogman. But there's something else. Entries that talk about Leah, about that day in the woods. His handwriting becomes more erratic, the words harder to read. One entry stands out, dated just a few days after Leah's death. June 15th, 2013.
It was supposed to be a normal trip. Keep him close, right? I kept telling myself. But I failed. Leah's gone, and it's my fault. I heard her scream, saw the shadows. I tried to get to her, but the thing, it was there. Too fast, too strong. My hands. Blood everywhere. No one will believe me. I can't even believe myself. I have to find it. I have to protect Ryan. I have to make it right. God, what have I done?
Before I can read further, the attic door creaks open, and Dad's voice slices through the stillness.
What are you doing up here?
His tone is sharp, almost panicked. I turn to see him standing in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide with something between anger and fear. I clutch the journal to my chest, my mind racing.
I found this. I was just trying to understand.
In an instant, he crosses the room and snatches the journal from my hand. His grip is tight, his knuckles white.
You had no right,
he growls, his voice trembling.
Dad, I just wanted to know the truth.
I shout, frustration boiling over.
What really happened to Leah?
His eyes flash with a mix of rage and anguish, and before I can react, he slaps me across the face. The force of it knocks me off balance and I stumble backwards, my cheek stinging. For a moment, there's a stunned silence. We both stand there, breathing hard, the air thick with tension.
I'm sorry,
Dad says, finally, his voice barely above a whisper.
I didn't mean to.
He trails off, clutching the journal to his chest like a lifeline. I touch my cheek, feeling the heat from the slap, and take a deep breath, trying to steady myself.
Dad, what aren't you telling me? What really happened that day?
Stay out of it, Ryan.
Dad growls, his eyes dark with anger.
You don't know what you're messing with.
He turns and storms out of the attic. I'm left standing there, my cheek throbbing, my mind racing. What the fuck is going on? What really happens to Leah? And what is Dad so afraid of? That night, I slept with my rifle within arm's reach, more afraid of my dad than any Dogman. The slap still burns on my cheek, and the look in his eyes, rage, fear, something darker, haunts me. I lie awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the old cabin, every sound amplified in the stillness. Eventually, exhaustion pulls me under, and I fall into a restless sleep. The dream returns, vivid and unsettling. I'm back in the woods, chasing after Leah. Her laughter echoes to the trees, a haunting reminder of happier times. This time, though, I push myself harder, refusing to let her slip away.
Ryan, catch me.
She calls, her voice playful.
I'm coming, Leah.
I shout, my legs pumping, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest around us is a twisted, shadowy maze, the trees seeming to close in on us. Leah's figure becomes clearer, her blonde hair catching the dim light filtering through the canopy. She stops, suddenly, turning to face me, her eyes wide with fear.
Leah, what is it?
I ask, my voice trembling.
Look behind you.
She whispers, her voice barely audible. I turn slowly, dread creeping up my spine. In the shadows, I see a figure, its form indistinct and shifting. It's not quite animal, not quite human, something in between. The sight of it sends a jolt of terror through me, and I wake up with a start, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I'm not in my bed. The ground beneath me is cold and hard, the smell of damp earth filling my nostrils. Panic rises as I realize I've sleptwalked into the forest. I scramble to my feet, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The moon casts a pale glow over the surroundings, revealing what looks like a long abandoned animal lair. The walls are covered in giant claw marks, deep gouges in the wood and earth. The air is heavy with a scent of decay, and a chill runs through me. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Carefully, I start to move, my eyes scanning the ground, desperate for a familiar landmark. That's when I see them. Faded scraps of fabric caught on the jagged edges of the underbrush. My steps falter, a sense of dread washing over me as I bend down to examine them. The fabric is torn, weathered by time and the elements, but unmistakably familiar. It's part of Leah's jacket, the bright pink one she wore on the day she disappeared. As I strain to make sense of it all, a rustling sound behind me snaps my focus. My heart leaps into my throat. I spin around, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle I don't have, because, of course, I didn't bring it in my unconscious state. The shadowy figure that emerges from the trees is unsettlingly familiar, mirroring the menacing forms of my nightmares. But as it steps into the moonlight, I recognize the worn jacket, the weary posture. It's Dad.
Ryan.
He calls out, his voice a mix of relief and stern concern.
I've been looking everywhere for you. What the hell are you doing out here?
I exhale slowly, the terror ebbing away as reality sets back in.
I don't know, Dad. I must have sleptwalked again.
My voice is shaky, my early dreams still clinging to the edges of my consciousness. Dad stares at me in disbelief.
You haven't sleptwalked since you were a kid, right? This isn't just a coincidence.
His eyes dart around, taking in the surroundings, the eerie, claw-marked den, the unsettling quiet of the woods.
How did you even find this place?
I shake my head, struggling to find an answer.
I don't know, Dad. I woke up here.
The uncertainty in my voice does nothing to ease the tension. His eyes lock onto the tattered remains of Leah's jacket in my hands, then something inside him snaps. The color drains from his face as he stumbles a few steps backward.
This is where it happened,
he murmurs, his voice barely a whisper.
This is where we found Leah.
I thought you said you don't remember anything from that night, he says accusingly.
I swear, Dad, I don't know anything about this place.
I insist, my own heart pounding.
It was you, wasn't it? You've been hiding this place from me.
His voice is frantic.
You, last night, the growling, it was you.
His voice rises, tinged with hysteria. I step back, my pulse racing, feeling the chill of the night and the weight of his accusation.
Dad, I don't know what you're talking about.
No, he interrupts, his voice breaking as he points a trembling finger at me.
You knew. You always knew. It was you, Ryan. All these years, the evidence was right there, but I refused to see it. You were the Dogman. You killed Leah.
His words hit me like a physical blow, absurd and horrifying in their implications.
Dad, you're not making any sense. You're talking crazy. I was just a little kid. How can I
protest, my voice shaky. He steps closer, his presence looming over me, the outline of his figure distorted by the shadow of the trees.
Think about it. It all makes sense now. You led us here to this place because you remember, because you did it. Dad, stop it! I shout, my heart pounding in my chest. You're scaring me. You need help, professional help. This isn't you.
But he's beyond reason, his eyes wild with a haunted grief.
I have to end this,
he mutters, more to himself than to me, his hand tightening around his rifle. His finger hovers dangerously over the trigger of his rifle. My instincts kick in, and I know I have to act fast. I lunge toward him, trying to knock the weapon away, but he's quicker than I expected. We struggle, our breaths heavy in the cold night air, the sounds of our scuffle the only noise in the otherwise silent woods. His strength surprises me, fueled by his frantic emotions. He shoves me back, and I stumble over a root, my balance lost for a crucial second. That's all he needs. He raises his rifle, his intentions clear in his wild, pained eyes. I dive to the ground just as the shot rings out, a deafening blast that echoes ominously through the trees. The bullet whizzes past, narrowly missing me, embedding itself in the bark of an old pine. I scramble to my feet, my heart pounding in my ears, and I start running. The underbrush claws at my clothes and skin, but I push through, driven by a primal urge to survive.
Dad, stop! It's me, Ryan!
I shout back as I dodge between the trees. Another shot breaks the silence, closer this time, sending splinters of wood flying from a nearby tree trunk. It's surreal, being hunted by my own father, a man tormented by grief and loss in his delusions. I don't stop to look back. I can hear him crashing through the forest behind me, his heavy breaths and muttered curses carried on the wind. The terrain is rough, and I'm fueled by adrenaline, but exhaustion is setting in. I need a plan. Ahead, I see a rocky outcrop and make a split-second decision to head for it. It offers a chance to hide, to catch my breath, and maybe reason with him if he catches up. As I reach the rocks, I slip behind the largest one, my body pressed tight against the cold, damp surface. I hear his footsteps approaching, slow and cautious now. As I press against the rock, trying to calm my racing heart, I can hear Dad's footsteps drawing closer, each step crunching ominously on the forest floor. He's methodical, deliberate, like a hunter stalking his prey.
Come out, Ryan.
Dad's voice is ragged, filled with a blend of fury and pain. My heart pounds against my chest, the cold sweat on my back making me shiver against the rough surface of the rock. I know I can't just sit here. It's only a matter of time before he finds me. Taking a deep breath, I peek around the edge of the rock, trying to gauge his position. I see him, rifle raised, scanning the area slowly. This might be my only chance to end this madness without further violence. I need to disarm him, to talk some sense into him if I can. As quietly as I can, I move out from behind the rock, my steps careful to avoid any twigs or leaves that might betray my position. I'm almost upon him when a branch snaps under my foot. A sound so trivial, yet so alarmingly loud in the quiet of the woods. Dad whirls around, looking completely unhinged.
Ryan,
he exclaims, his rifle swinging in my direction. Panic overtakes me, and I lunge forward, my hands reaching for the gun. We struggle, the rifle between us, our breaths heavy and erratic.
Dad, please, stop.
I plead, trying to wrestle the gun away. but he's strong, stronger than I expected. In the chaos, the rifle goes off. The sound is deafening, a sharp echo that seems to reverberate off every tree around us. Pain explodes in my abdomen, sharp and burning, like nothing I've ever felt before. I stagger back, my hands instinctively going to the wound. The warmth of my own blood coats my fingers, stark and terrifying. Dad drops the rifle, his eyes wide with horror.
Oh my God, what have I done?
He gasps, rushing to my side as I collapse onto the forest floor. As the pain sears through me, a strange, overpowering energy surges within. It's wild, primal, unlike anything I've ever experienced. Looking down in horror, my hands are no longer hands, but large, hairy, clawed appendages. The transformation is rapid, consuming. My vision blurs, senses heightened, and a raw, guttural growl builds in my throat. In that moment, a flood of understanding washes over me, mingling with the horror of realization. These are the hands of the creature from my nightmares. The creature whose face I can never fully recall because, as I now understand, it is me. What happens next feels detached, as if I'm no longer in control of my own actions. Watching from a distance as my body moves on its own, I turn towards my dad, his face a mask of terror. He stumbles back, his eyes wide with the dawning realization of what his son has become. The forest around us seems to fall silent, holding its breath as the nightmarish scene unfolds. I can hear my own growls, guttural and deep, filling the air with a sound that's both foreign and intimately familiar. The pain in my abdomen fuels a dark, violent urge, an urge that's too strong to resist. With a ferocity that feels both alien and intrinsic, I move towards him. My dad, paralyzed by fear and shock, doesn't run. Maybe he can't. Maybe he doesn't want to. The encounter is brutal and swift, a blur of motion and violence. My dad barely puts up a struggle, as though resigned to his fate. Not that there's anything he can do. The creature that I've become is too powerful, too consumed by the wild instincts surging through me. I tear him apart, limb from bloody limb. My hands, no, my claws, rending through fabric and flesh with disgusting ease. The sound of my dad's screams, of tearing fabric and flesh, is drowned out by the animalistic growls that echo through the trees. When it's all over, the red mist that had clouded my vision begins to fade, and the fierce, uncontrollable rage that drove my actions subsides. I'm left standing, my breaths heavy and erratic, in the eerie stillness of the forest. The transformation reverses as quickly as it came on, and I find myself back in my human form. My clothes are ripped to shreds, hanging off my frame in tattered remnants. At my feet lies what's left of my dad, his body torn and unrecognizable. I glance down at my abdomen, expecting agony, but instead find my wound miraculously healed. No sign of the gunshot remains, just a faint scar where I expected a bloody mess. Shock sets in, a numbing disbelief mixed with a gut-wrenching realization of what I've become and what I've done. My hands, now human again, tremble as I look at them, half expecting to see the claws that had so effortlessly ripped through flesh and bone. But there's only blood, my father's blood, against my skin. I stand there for what feels like an eternity, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Eventually, the shock wears thin,
and a cold practicality takes hold. I need to get out of here. I need to cover my tracks, to disappear. Because who would believe this? Who would understand that I didn't choose this? That I'm not a monster by choice? With trembling hands, I do what's necessary. I bury my dad in a shallow grave. The physical act of digging strangely grounding. I cover with leaves and branches a pitiful attempt to hide the brutality of his end. I take a moment, whispering apologies into the wind, knowing full well that nothing I say can change what happened. I leave the forest behind, my mind a whirl of dark thoughts. As I walk, the first hints of dawn brush against the horizon. The sky bleeding a soft pink. It's hauntingly beautiful.
For those involved in dealing with cryptids, if any of you are reading this, why do you do it? Other than the money, of course, I feel a lot of you do it for the rush, the adrenaline. But where's the line drawn? Where does exhilaration evolve into panic? Don't get me wrong, a little risk-taking is food for the soul, but so many factors can go wrong in any situation. In particular, what do you do when you find the corpse of a cryptid you are hunting, eviscerated and dismembered? When the abrupt realization hits you that there's a bigger fish. My grandpa wasn't quite on the level of monster hunting, but boy was he a crazy guy. Once he hunted a grizzly using nothing but a crossbow, wet mud, leaves, and his wit. He's had its head mounted above his forest house fireplace ever since. I can't say how far back his love for the wilderness is rooted, but I know that he grew tired of the city long before retiring from his job as a metropolitan engineer. Since then, he's lived out in the old house in the northwestern reaches of the Olympic National Forest, about 40 miles from the park itself, Washington State. I can only imagine how lonely it must have been, living out there by himself, but he never seemed any worse for it. In the recent years, I've come to be good friends with a guy I met in college, Martin. I could see the same fire in his eyes as my grandpa's when he came to the outdoors, always pestering me to come with him on camping trips, going fishing, hunting, you name it. It was a no-brainer bringing him along for a visit to my grandpa's. Honestly, I feared that they might get along too well, and Martin would never return with me. In the end, it didn't matter, because both of us had been ingrained with a morbid aversion to the woods since that day. Martin was particularly eager this time, practically vibrating in the passenger seat of my Jeep. Last trip, Grandpa promised he'd show him the ropes of skinning and pelts. Martin often went on about how he feels sitting in front of a roaring fireplace with a great deerskin rug laid out beneath it. My motivation was simply to check up on my grandpa. He hadn't been responding to my attempts at contacting him for the past week, so naturally I was a bit worried. We ran into a problem early, driving up the long dirt road to my grandpa's. Rounding a corner, I slammed on the brakes, seeing a slew of fallen trees lying across the road. "Damn, what happened here?" Martin exclaimed. "There haven't been any storms recently, right?" I sat with my hands 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, lost for words. No. It's been pretty clear weather around these parts since March. Weird. Shutting the engine off, I hopped out of the Jeep. The only sounds were the leaves flittering in the mid-spring breeze, nature's white noise. We were a little over 2 miles away from the house, an easy walkable distance. Grandpa had enough equipment that we didn't need to bring much of our own, so our bags were light. I had my phone, a flashlight, water, spare clothes, and my utility watch strapped around my wrist. My plan was to get to Grandpa's and come back down in his truck to chop up the fallen logs with a chainsaw.
We thought it would be more fun to go through the woods alongside the track. A long dirt road means only boredom after all. We scrambled down the left side slope and began our trek, keeping an eye on the road to follow its route. Only a few minutes later, the smell hits us. Putrid carrion. It was nothing unexpected. Animals in the forest die all the time. Even so, that hardwired part of my brain was repulsed at the smell. Shit, something's festering out here, I said. Can't imagine how it'd smell in the summer. Martin let out a small retch, but agreed. The stench only grew stronger as we went on. It was at its peak when I almost tripped over a sharp object on the ground. I thought it to be a cluster of branches at first, but the notion quickly dissolved upon seeing their pale ceramic reflections. A decapitated stag head lay right in front of us. It was wrong, though. The teeth were too long, and the bone of its face was exposed. Even with the odor, I could tell it was fresh from the vicious black blood that seeped from its neck and mouth. Martin spoke up. Damn, that's freaky. You think a bear did this? I mean, there's only black bears out here, right? I doubt they could pull off something like this. A cougar, maybe? I don't know. Never seen one straight up decapitate a stag like this, though. My eyes were drawn to a trail of blood, forming a jagged streak ahead of us on the ground. My gaze followed it until it terminated at the stag's grisly mess of a body. Well, it looked quadrupedal from a distance, but as we moved closer, I found I had been sorely incorrect. The body was that of a monster, large in stature but bony and gaunt. Long razor-sharp claws lying splayed across the ground like kitchen knives, and all covered in patches of dark, wizened fur. Is it bad? Martin called out, approaching from behind me to get a look. When he saw it, he went still and quiet, as I had. There was no statement that could do the sight justice. I heard the old tales of horrors lurking deep inside the forest, but never experienced them face to face. It was still, lying dead as the fallen leaves beneath it. It looked crushed and broken, littered with what seemed to be deep, wide puncture wounds. Martin managed to speak up. Is that? But before he could say any more, a sudden snap broke the tension. The snap of a twig. No, a branch. My spine shot upright. Against my better judgment, I found my head gradually swiveling in the direction the noise had come from. When I caught a vast hulking shape in my peripheral, I whipped around to face whatever was there. I saw something just for a moment. Enormous, long limbs draped in shaggy hair, the color of pine bark. But as quickly as I had turned, the image vanished. Rising dread threatened to pry my lips apart in a scream. I looked far and wide, but nothing was there. Kill. What was it? Wait, the cougar isn't still here, is it? Martin whispered. No, it's nothing. Let's keep going. We can talk about this later with my grandpa. But that cat could still be loitering around somewhere. It's best we don't stay in the same place for too long. Before departing, I snapped a few pictures of the mangled corpse on my phone, zooming in on the head without backtracking to get a better angle. Something told me that turning back, however briefly, would be a terrible mistake. We went on with urgent pace, pretending to ignore the heavy movements between the trees nearby. Large animals will inevitably give away their movements, but they snap twigs, not entire branches. Even so, the movements sounded anything but clumsy. No, they sounded calculated, those of a stalking predator. As hard as I tried to filter them out, I caught myself glancing to the sides and behind very often. I don't know whether I was hoping to see something or nothing. Still, the woods around us were empty, other than ourselves. Hey, Cal, if there's a mountain lion around here, we should go up the road for a bit. It'll be easier to bolt if we need to. I agreed, and we veered off to the right, climbing up the roadside slope. Deep down, I knew that whatever was out there, it wasn't a big cat. We only told ourselves that, skirting the subjects of monsters, now made very real to us. The forest fell silent as we walked along the road. That was far from being comforting, though. If the woods are quiet, predators are about. It's a well-known idea in the community of wilderness enthusiasts. What did ease my mind to a degree was the sight of a herd of deer standing in the track. They cocked their heads to look at us, but didn't seem all that disturbed by our presence. At the same time, a feeling of being exposed, vulnerable, grew as a hard lump in my gut. They started to move on as we got closer, wandering off the road and into the woods. One of the deer stayed in place. It wasn't frozen, no, but constricted. It twitched and whimpered as it started to rise off the ground, as if weightless. It happened so quickly. Its screams were cut off as its limbs were snapped and crushed, and deep wounds erupted over its body. And then, like it had been there the whole time, it stood. It was a nightmare. Huge. Unimaginably so. Rivaling 2 elephants stacked up. It was hunched over, resting on impossibly long and thick forearms, ending in spindly, sloth-like claws. Its body was too long, ending in a pair of shorter legs. Knees inverted with feet supported by spur-like appendages. The lolling head set atop an arched neck looked like some bizarre cross between a horse and a crocodile. Hollow pits in place of its eyes, the torn skin around its mouth revealing horrible, uneven, and misshapen teeth that jutted out at irregular angles. The fading sunlight glinted off the long gashes covering its sides and head. The dead creature from earlier had definitely put up a fight, but it could never have been enough. As we stood stunned, it reciprocated our stare, the only real movements being the sets of rib-like appendages undulating on its underside, rendering the deer into a torn sack of flesh and bone fragments. The poor animal seemed to wither before our eyes as the sharp ribs forced deeper into its body. In that moment, we were part of the herd, paralyzed. Some had already run off, but others were as statues in the presence of this beast. Another smell hit us, different from the stench of decay like earlier, but equally sickening. Like moist earth, sulfur, methane, and dead fish. Its source was clearly as wisps of gas from the beast's mouth became thick, billowing fumes, rising into the evening sky. The tension was broken with the deer's mutilated husk thudding to the ground. The remaining deer took flight, scampering off into the trees, and in response, the beast had snapped its head in their direction. Something was wrong with its head, flopping around clumsily as it turned. I took a step back as it let out a deep, guttural rattle, before bounding off after the herd, its matted hair swinging violently. It splintered a tree as it went by, but was totally unfazed by the impact. We waited until its thundering gallops faded into the quickly darkening night before saying anything. What the freak was that thing? Martin sputtered, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't know, man, but we gotta get to the house before sundown. I have a feeling our chances at escaping it are as little to none in the dark. Are you crazy? We have to go back. I want to get as far from this place as possible. What about my grandpa? We can't just leave him here with that thing. Martin didn't look over to me, but wasted no time disagreeing, starting his jog up the road. We were already halfway to my grandpa's house, and even if we wanted to escape, it would be a menial task for the creature to smash the Jeep off-road. The solitary light in the distance looked like the gates of heaven. It radiated safety, but I knew we couldn't continue out in the open, completely exposed. I looked down to my utility watch, making a mental note of the direction of the house. Northeast, before grabbing Martin by the arm and leading him off the side of the road. Nature's cruel irony manifested in the steepening terrain and the thickening brush. The house's light quickly faded, leaving us with only our bearings to navigate. I thought we might have gone off track for a terrifying moment, but I saw the column of smoke above the distant tree canopy that could only be from my grandpa's chimney. "Come on, this way." As we neared, no light became apparent. Maybe he'd already gone to bed. I could only guess with his lack of communication. We came up onto the lip of the hill, sloping down towards a flat clearing, but there was no house. There, the pillar of smoke, but there was no source. It began in mid-air, from nothing. As we stopped to look, the point where the smoke came from jerked around in the air. When I picked up on its organic stench, it clicked in my mind. Just like before, there it was, looking directly at us, the thick fumes spewing from its mouth. But I noticed something else this time. Now that the moon hung in the sky, its light glinted off of something beneath the creature's head. 6 black orbs, shiny like obsidian, 3 on either side of its neck. They darted about, independent of each other, and I immediately knew what they were. Eyes. What kind of abomination was this? If those were its eyes, and it ate the deer with that structure resembling a ribcage, then that must have meant it had a false head. A distraction. A defense mechanism, maybe. It made sense how this head flopped around limply with the beast's unnatural movements. I blinked in quick succession and looked down to my watch. Due east. We've been misled. It circled around us as we lie in wait. In one motion, I gripped onto Martin's shoulder and pulled him into the direction we were meant to be heading, in a wild sprint for survival. The beast erupted into movements, ribs rippling as it let out another rumbling trill. Martin looked over to me, confused. "Hey dude, what are you doing? There's nothing Shut up, shut up. Just run as fast as you can. Now, don't stop for anything." Our pounding feet were matched by heavy thumps and loud cracks of trees being smashed. I dare not steal a glance behind, fearing that even the slightest break in pace would mean death. There! I struggled to see what Martin was talking about, until the yellow light became visible between the tree trunks. We were only a few hundred yards away, but I was surprised the creature hadn't already caught up to us. Even the trees in its way stood no chance at impeding it. It had almost caught up. I could feel the air pressure from its massive body charging through the trees behind, close enough that at any moment I might feel its claws cleave my body into pieces. A saving grace. Coming up on our left was a dense patch of old trees. I swerved towards them, leaping through the space between the trunks, just large enough for us to get through. I hit the ground, rolling sideways. There wasn't even time to be dazed as an immense slam sounded from where we'd just been. I scrambled backwards, looking to see a great arm slinking through the gap. It was thick, but not as thick as the oaks. The claw tapped about, searching blindly for our frail bodies. "Go!" I shouted, and then the both of us shot to our feet and bolted towards the light. As we ran, the sounds grew distant. Was it stunned? Or did it still think we were behind those trees? I didn't care. All that mattered was being inside and not out. Gravel clattered against the front of the house as we skidded to a stop. I rapped on the door, devolving into a pounding when they went unheard. On what was probably the 12th knock, my fist only met air, and I stumbled in through the now open doorway. I looked up to meet my grandpa's gaze. His eyes were wild. He didn't look like himself. He glanced behind me at Martin, then behind him. Whatever he saw out there, his pupils contracted in response. "Hurry, boys, get inside," he whisper-shouted. We filed in, and when he went to bolt the door, he hesitated. His hands fell limply. No use. He was right. If the beast wanted to pay a visit, it would do so regardless of the home's security. We followed him quietly to an uncovered floor hatch, "What's this, Mr. Barnett?" Martin asked, regarding the hatch. "Huh? Oh, this here's my old wine cellar." Martin tried to ask further before being interrupted. Get down the ladder first, son. You can shoot your questions once we're safe." He pulled on the handle, opening the hatch to reveal a sturdy wooden ladder that led deep into the dim space beneath. One by one, we clambered down its dusty rungs, meeting the cold concrete floor at the bottom. Grandpa was last, tugging at the heavy rug over the open hatch, before closing and securing it. "I take you've seen the thing, right?" "Geez, Granddad, we barely got away," I gasped, still out of breath from our escape. "Unscathed?" "Yeah, mostly other than some scratches." "Good." He walked over to an upturned crate and plopped down onto it. Martin and I looked between each other, then back at him. Well, Martin said. "You seem to know what we're dealing with, so what the hell is it?" Grandpa gave Martin a scowl of disapproval, quickly relenting into understanding. "I'd scrutinize you on your manners, boy, but now ain't the time." He released a tired gasp, letting his head drop down before inhaling sharply and looking back up at us. I'd seen it only once before in my varsity years. Had some Danish friends on my course who said I should come visit them over there, go and do some backpacking in their home country. Beautiful landscapes over in Denmark, really. Peaks rising out of the trees, you know? Before he could lose himself in a daydream, I cleared my throat to bring him back to reality. "Oh, right. So we were pretty deep in the woods when it happened. We all gotten paranoid because we thought something was following us. Something big. Elk, maybe. But we never saw nothing, only heard it. And then, jeez, one of the girls in front of me started to levitate. I don't know, she was just rising off up the ground, gripped by something. Whatever it was made a mess of her, crunched her up like a meatball being squeezed. I saw it then. Curved bones wrapped around her, stabbing in deep. Ain't never gonna forget the sight of it. It's like a stain on my mind. We saw the same thing, Martin piped up, only it was a deer. It looked like it sucked everything out of it when it was done. Yeah, I can't say I know how it works. You can only see it if you know something's there. If it's there. Anyway, we ran as fast as we could coming back down the trail, and we seemed to lose it. The whole time there was this rancid stink though. Eggy and earthy. Ugh. We wound up back into the town we'd started from, went straight to the police station and reported it. Apparently all they found was a little chunk of meat, piece of thigh or something like that. One of the other guys told me about the tale later on. He brought up the smoke we saw rising out of the forest when we were back in town. An old Danish legend went that the people throughout history seen smoke columns in the woods, and most who went to check it out never returned. They said it would move around, not like how a fire would spread, but like it was wandering, to and fro. "Damn, that's a horrible story, Grandpa," I said. "It doesn't help us figure out what it is, though. We already know the stuff that you just told us." "Well," he replied, "I'm sure it's got many names, seeing how it could just pop up where it likes, but I only heard it called the Skorstendyr. Means chimney beast, if I'm remembering right." "That makes sense. We thought we were seeing smoke from your chimney, but it led us right to it." "Kill," Grandpa sighed. "This house doesn't even have a chimney." Martin looked over to me, scoffing, then back over to Grandpa. "So it lures in people like that?" "Sure, but I don't think it means to. I'm gonna take a gander and say it started up with the fumes after it ate that deer." "Yeah," I replied. "Whatever that thing is, it ain't from here. It ain't from anywhere on the planet, I think. It eats something, then starts giving off smoke. Waste product from digesting, I guess." "So, shake gas?" Martin chuckled. He always was able to find a way to lighten the mood in dire situations, even if it was just a little. I looked up at the monochrome ceiling above us, mulling over what Grandpa had said. I remember how this whole situation had started and pulled out my phone to bring up my photos. We found this after starting our way up to yours on foot. I have an inkling, but do you know what this is? Grandpa squinted at the screen, then took it from my hand. Scroll to the right. That's the only head, I said. His silent focus was only punctured by the dull tapping of his fingers on the screen. Recognition lit up in his eyes, his head bobbing up and down. Well, I'll be damned. Wendigo, right? I asked. Yep. I gotta say, never seen one of those around these parts before, but then again, I was never looking for one. I doubt you need it, but keep that as a reminder for what that beast is capable of. I put my phone back in my pocket, sighing and letting my chin drop into my hands. In any other situation, I'd be shocked to find out such a creature was real, but not now. This is all great, Mr. Barnett, Martin said with quivering uncertainty, but it doesn't help us. What are we gonna do? What can we do? I don't know. Well, I have a stupid idea, but it's just grasping at straws. Anything over sitting here and waiting to die, Martin breathed, staring off into space. Anything. Grandpa looked up towards the basement window, the only source of natural light in the room, what little of it remained. Well, I was checking my traps out east from here, about 600-700 yards into the woods. Only when I got there, there was this smudge. I don't know what to call it, but that's the best I can describe what it looked like. It was like looking into it. I couldn't register what I was looking at. Hurt my eyes after a while. Never seen nothing like it. Was after that I started seeing that Skorskinder, so. He trailed off, like he was struggling to find the words to say. So what? I pressed, leaning forward in anticipation. Again, this is guesswork, but I think that's where it came out from. I threw a rock into it when I was there, but ain't here hit the ground. Like it went someplace else. If we can just lead it back there, just get it to go back in. Wait, hold on, I interrupted. Shouldn't we call someone? Police? The damn army? What do you think will happen when the cops come out here, huh? What's a chief and a rookie in one police car gonna be able to do against it? And good luck convincing US military to send out Marines. You'd be lucky if they thought it was a joke. I shut my mouth, swallowing my next words, allowing Grandpa to continue with his proposition. Either the beast leaves or we die. I'm not going to talk about trying to drive away. You've seen what it does to the trees. Stealth might work, but it's better at that than we are, big as it is, and I don't want to risk either of you losing your lives. His last remark sent a chill down my spine. He said nothing explicitly, but I already began to understand what he meant. Granddad, don't worry about it, champ. I got something, but you gotta listen closely. Both of you. Martin and I set our full attention on him. I wanted to hear his plan, but I was really hoping it was gonna go in a different way from what I was thinking. Now I want to make this clear before anything else. I'm going alone. And both you boys need to sit tight and do as I say. My heart dropped, plunging into the stone-cold sea of despair. Are you crazy? No, I have to go with you. Grandpa cut me off, shushing me. As I said, he commanded. I knew he was right, but in the face of loss, my thoughts wrestled against the idea. Okay, now I'm gonna call you when I'm a ways off, alright? You have to pick up and stay on the call with me. It's vital you keep your attention on my voice. I need both you to be brave for the next part. I need you to make as much noise as you can. Martin's eyes bulged in fear. Won't that just get us killed? I haven't finished. That's only up until I call you. When I do, you shut up and you hide in the darkest corner of this cellar, okay? I was heaving for breath now. Cold beads of sweat budding on my forehead, but I closed my eyes and stilled myself. Yeah, okay. Good. Once we're connected, I'll start. We were silenced by a single muffled thump from overhead, so forceful that the ceiling spewed cement dust down on us. Then another thump, and another, and another. I fell off my perch in shock when another booming crash sounded from above, chased by the clattering of rubble. The steady thuds drew nearer, louder, until the only sound was that of the floorboards groaning against immense weight. I looked over to Grandpa, who looked over to me and whipped up a finger to his lips. I nodded, then slowly turned towards the basement hatch. The beast was trying its best to move silently. A stifled whimper escaped my lungs as I saw the hatch buckle. A loud bang shook the house's foundation. Then nothing. In the silence, I could make out the beast's ticking growl. It was toying with us, trying to catch us out. Make us think we'd been foiled so we'd burst out in panic and try to flee. Its intelligence terrified me so much more than its grotesque appearance. It tried this bait a few more times before huffing angrily. The heavy creaks grew distant until we could no longer hear it, aside from a single crash of a falling tree somewhere outside. I stood up, eager to set this plan into motion, only to be drawn back down by a firm grip on my arm. My eyes fell to meet my grandpa's, looking at me with a wide-eyed scowl. "Sit down," he hissed. "Not yet. Bastard's clever. It's probably waiting at the tree line, watching for us to come out." The three of us sat in silence, ears attuned for even the slightest noise to indicate its presence. After an excruciating wait, Grandpa rose to his feet and crept over to the ladder. He scaled it, wincing at the creak of a rung, then pushed open the hatch ever so slowly. The rung that had been above was tattered, torn fragments slipping down into a now open space. He peeked out from side to side, checking rigorously that we were safe. As he pressed his hand upwards, what sounded like a broken tile was disturbed, clattering to the floor above us. Grandpa froze in place, visibly tensing. The hatch creaked. The heavy step followed by a guttural rattle. I prayed to God I wouldn't hear forced Grandpa into action. He pushed himself off the ladder, tugging and rolling onto the floor, right before the hatch was slammed by an immense force, cracking it and warping the hinges. Grandpa shot to his feet, adrenaline far outpacing his old age. He glanced around wildly at the floor before looking up at us with a newfound determination. "Ah, shit. Damn it. Change of plans. Martin, distract it. Make some noise. Kel, give me a leg up to this window." Martin's jaw fell open and his breathing quickened. "Ah, frick," he yelped, pressing his fingers to his temples, but to his credit, he turned towards the hatch and started up a racket straight away. "Come get it, you freak! You ugly sack of crap!" While Martin was busy cussing out the chimney beast, Grandpa and I hurried over to the window and braced myself in a kneel, fingers locking together, forming a foothold where he planted a foot. 1, 2, 3! I heaved him up, holding my posture while he unlatched and swung the window open. My body was already tired from running away, and Grandpa was heavier than he looked. Still, I hauled him up further until he was out past the waist, and he pulled himself out into the hazy night. I kept my focus on him as he turned around, refusing the urge to look as I heard claws cleaving away ravenously. "Alright, I'll be calling in a minute," he panted. "When I do, tell Martin to zip. I love you, bud." "You too, Granddad." My words latched onto him, fueling a forgotten instinct that slammed his heels into the forest floor and sent him sprinting into the trees, fading until he was merged with the darkness itself. I was grounded again when Martin let out a shriek, and I turned to see him backpedaling from those spindly claws extending through the jagged hole that was once the hatch. A thick trail of blood smeared from him as he shuffled back, the same crimson that slicked one of the titanic claws. "It got me. Ah, it hurts," he cried, flipping over and resorting to a belly crawl towards me. I rushed over and dragged him away as far as I could, but he flopped to the floor in shock when I released my grip. His calf was a mess of exposed, glistening flesh and bone, sliced through like warm butter. His mouth hung half open but with no sound, so I rushed to build a cacophony in his place. As booming as I tried to make myself sound, I devolved into whimpering shouts. The beast's arm had reached halfway across the room, yet it still slithered further and further through the broken hatch, claws ticking around in search for our flesh. Backed up into the furthest corner alongside Martin, the monstrous hand grew closer, slowly, agonizingly slow. I only became aware of the incoming call from the vibration in my jacket pocket. It felt as if somehow safety lay in the act of answering my grandpa's call. My hand shot into my pocket and yanked the phone out, fumbling with the touchscreen and picking up. "Granddad? It's close. It's about to get us. Do something, please," I wailed into the phone. Instead of replying, a loud crack rang through the night, and then the phone. The beast's arm lurched backwards, freezing for a moment, before it tore out from the basement, peppering the floor with wood fragments. As simple as the sound it was, I recognized it. His Black Hawk. He had taken it with him. I don't know when he picked it up. He must have had it on him the entire time. Out the window, I saw the hulking silhouette barreling into the trees, at speeds rivaling my Jeep in fifth. I jumped when I heard my grandpa abruptly begin shouting over the call. The words were indiscernible, blending in with the scuffling sounds of movement. I took the moment to take off my jacket and my t-shirt, which I pulled tightly around Martin's upper calf as a tourniquet. "Hey, Cal," Grandpa said over the phone, sounding hollow and tiny. "Make sure you keep up your aerobics. This shit doesn't get easier with the years." I let out a half-hearted chuckle. "I will. I wanted to go hiking through these woods with you. Camping. Surviving off the hunt." "I know you do. Oh God, I do too," he said, stifling a sob. "You're gonna have to stay strong for your ma, okay? There ain't no chance I'm getting out this time. But you two are." I broke down then, thick watery streams lining my cheeks. "I'm gonna miss you. So much, Granddad. Hey, but we had some good times together. Amazing times, no? I sure as hell did. And well, this is a pretty badass way to go out, right?" An unfamiliar comfort swelled up inside of me, almost breaking through the tears. "Yeah. Alright, I'm here. This much. No idea what I'll find through here." I could hear the thundering beast across the call as it gained on him. Its clicks and rattles, too. "I'm going in. Promise me one thing, though." "Anything, Granddad." You be a good kid, and make my daughter proud. That's all." A bizarre noise came from the phone speaker, something akin to the sound of a stone sliding across a frozen lake, followed by a splash that seemed to kill all noise. That dead silence was broken when a shuddering voice spoke again through the phone. "What the? Where are you?" I yelled, pleading for any small morsel of information he could provide. "I don't know, I'm in a pipeline, I think. Some kind of glass tube. I can see everything outside. It's all there, all at once. There's more of these tubes, so many more. They're branching and splitting, but..." The connection got progressively weaker as he talked, jittering and buzzing in my ears. "I'm heading down this tube now, and there's a central one, but it's huge, enormous. Holy crap. No, I don't think it's a central one. In the distance, so many. The hell is this place?" My exhausted brain couldn't fathom a single thing to say. I just listened, almost as confused as he was. "Streams through some of them, and..." He was cut off by a tremendous splash, but the sound quality at that point made it sound more like a roar. I could only hear his whimpers, until that hissing trail crawled its way under my skin once more. It melded with the audio glitches, but then I heard something I could never have expected, even after seeing what I had seen. It sounded as if the creature was stuttering, clearing its throat before. "Exalted be Radoth, for its flow shows the path." It spoke. The unearthly nightmare beast had spoken. Its words were jarring, like it was repeating after someone had taught it how to talk, broken by animalistic clicks and hisses. Grandpa screamed, but the call lost connection completely and drew it out as a high sine wave tone. My hand acted of its own accord and loosened its grip, sending the phone clattering to the floor. By the time I had crouched down to grab it, only my home screen greeted me as I pressed the home button. Call failed. I looked down to Martin. He was out cold, but breathing. The bleeding had died down, but he needed urgent treatment. Even so, I fell to the floor, back slouched up against the cold concrete wall, and decided to wait it out until sunrise. I was certain Grandpa's plan worked, but just the slightest uncertainty held me in place. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off. My limbs ached, head thumping. I fought against my eyelids, but they fell as if they were being dragged down by anchors. All light vanished, and I faded into sleep. I woke to the heat on my face and the red-orange blur. I opened my eyes, grimacing at the rays of sunlight that poured through the destroyed basement hatch directly onto my face. Any notions of a simple nightmare were shattered. Martin. I rolled over on my side, seeing him laying a few feet away. Thank God he was still breathing. The blood coated the skin of his left leg and was dried and crusted, but a small amount of it still seeped from his mangled limb. I chose to let him rest while I turned to the broken ladder, hauling myself up what remained of its rungs and out into the house. What remained of it, at least. Utter devastation. I do not exaggerate when I say almost the entire front portion of the house was gone. Wooden beams jutted out from piles of rubble and dust, but all was still. Unlike the day prior, birdsong weaved through the woods and into the ruins. I recalled learning about how forest animals would go quiet when a predator is nearby, but I'd been too on edge to notice until their sounds had returned. Still, subtle chills wormed their way through my spine. I felt safe, but I also felt safe with Grandpa in the basement until the attack. No smoke plume from anywhere across the tree line, and no stench defiled my nose, but I couldn't shake it. I spent some time scrambling around in the back half of the house that still stood. Quicker than expected, I found the keys to Grandpa's truck in the corner of the kitchen counter. I practically leaped down into the old wine cellar, then slowed my pace, gently shaking Martin until he stirred. He was groggy and confused. "Don't worry, man. I'm gonna get you home." I wrapped his left arm over my shoulder, supporting him to the ladder. It was tough getting him out, but I did, and we hobbled through the ruins to the truck. Driving faster than truly necessary, I swerved, slamming on the brakes where the fallen tree trunks came into view, almost out of nowhere. The jolt shook Martin, and he came to attention from the pain in his leg. I apologized for it, but wasted no more time in getting out and helping Martin down from his seat. The stench of death was strong in the air. The Wendigo's corpse festered nearby. It brought me back to the night before, the raw terror spawning paranoia within me that grew intense over the short walk between the truck and my Jeep. I felt exposed, naked. We made it across the trees and into my Jeep quickly, even with Martin's injury. Still, without any warning signs of the beast, my heart was drumming so hard I could see my chest pulse. After a messy three-point turn, the wheel slipped, kicking up dust before we shot away down the track. We drove until we reached the small police station, where I flew out of the Jeep and bursted through its double doors. Perhaps a rash action in retrospect, but my mind was elsewhere. Before anything else, I had them call an ambulance for my friend, following by reporting a severe animal attack. When I was asked what attacked us, I spat out, "Cougar." The officer grunted and I laid out the facts. Grandpa was gone, dragged away by our assailant. An ambulance arrived soon after to pick up Martin. The EMTs were visibly surprised by the laceration, but attended to him nonetheless. He lost a fair bit of blood, but they quickly got him in stable condition at the nearest hospital, where he stayed for the next week. A search party banded together to look for Grandpa, but they found nothing, of course. I was questioned about the state of his house, but I think the trauma welling up in my eyes was the best defense I could have. No scorch marks on the rubble to indicate explosives. Nothing. It's been a few years since this all happened, and I've made my way through the stages of grief in one piece. I like to say Grandpa lives on in my memory, but that wouldn't be entirely accurate to say. I can still remember him, our conversations, days out, the smell of his fireplace, all that. But no matter how hard I try, I can't remember what he looks like. That's to say, there's only an imperceptible smudge where he once was in any pictures I still have. I don't know where he ended up, some massive network of tubes, but I get the distinct impression that his grave lies elsewhere, in another place separated from this world. I'm eternally grateful for his sacrifice, yeah, but I can't help but think that it was only our lives that were saved from the Skorstender. Are there more of them? Or is it somehow able to relocate itself? Only my grandpa would have answers, but yeah. Just in case, if you find yourself out in the wilderness and you see a steady plume of smoke rising from the trees, perhaps even smell the organic stench of digestion, it'd be best to call off the occasion entirely. Once it's onto you, well, I only hope you're as lucky as we were on the day that my grandpa died.
When I was 8 years old, both of my parents worked full-time. My dad was predominantly on the third shift at his job, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We lived literally right up the road from my grandparents in a very small town. It was getting close to my 9th birthday when I contracted strep throat and scarlet fever. I was severely sick, could barely even speak, had the first case of cold sweats that I remember in my life, and could barely pull myself out of bed to even use the restroom. I was absolutely miserable, and of course, being as young as I was, I didn't take the pain very well. My poor mother was at a loss of what to even do with her working and Dad needing to use the daylight hours to sleep. The first day I was sick, perhaps it was Tuesday, my birthday would fall on a Friday. My dad stayed up most of the day with me, made me food, let me sleep in his lap on the couch, wiped my forehead down, made sure that I took my medication, etc. But on the second day, my grandmother had called and offered to let me stay at her house so my dad could get some sleep. He said yes and woke me up around 7 in the morning to drive me up to her home. My grandfather also worked at this time too, so he was already gone to work when I arrived there. I don't remember too much of the early morning. I probably just slept in my grandmother's bed, tossing and turning when I'd wake up feeling extra bad. She encouraged me to swallow my awful tasting medicine a little more gently than my dad did. She did fix me some tomato soup to try and eat, and it was the first time since I had gotten sick that I actually had an appetite. I should mention that my grandmother has this cute little Yorkshire Terrier named Samson. He was very docile, not like a usual annoying, barking all the time type of terrier. Samson came into the room and curled up next to me as I dozed. I do know that when I woke up at some point, it had to be early afternoon, lunchtime, because I could hear the TV faintly from the living room on some game show. My grandmother had a ritual of eating her lunch while watching a game show. I think it was like The Price is Right. I was trying to fall back asleep because I had gotten this really bad headache, maybe from dehydration. I was on the verge of falling asleep when I jolted awake by the "Samson!" yelp that erupted from the living room. The terrier curled up next to my feet, perked up, but didn't move. I knew I had heard his name being called too, but it was odd. He didn't respond. "Samson!" my grandmother called again. "Samson! Samson!" The dog still didn't run out of the room to her. I was confused as he was very obedient to my grandmother. He was almost frozen, staring at the cracked open door, but making no attempt to go to her. She called again. "Samson!" Maybe 3 or 4 times more. Then I got annoyed. I remember flinging the covers off of me. Of course, my clothes are sticky and sweaty, and I generally feel uncomfortable and groggy. I stumbled out of the room, wiping my eyes, asking, "Grandma, do you need Samson? He's in the room with me." I'm in the living room and have to do a double take. The TV is still on and blaring. There's a bowl of soup sitting on the coffee table and an open Pepsi next to it. But my grandmother isn't anywhere to be found. Maybe she's in the bathroom. I crossed the room and went past the kitchen. Empty too. I got to the bathroom door, which was shut, and knocked. Nothing. I then opened it. No one was in there. The house is empty. It's not a huge house either. I've covered all the rooms. So yes, my first reaction was to get scared. I could clearly hear my grandmother calling for the dog, but she's not anywhere inside. I can feel my hand and feet getting a little tingly. I started shouting for my grandma, but my voice is just echoing through the small, cramped home. Samson had gotten up at this point and was sitting near the couch, looking completely undisturbed. I fumbled for the remote and turned the TV off and yelled, more like wheezed, to the top of my lungs, which you can imagine was very painful, and it was very scratchy, and I had an infected throat. "Grandma!" The worst part happened next. I heard her shouting my name back, clear as ever, like she was standing only a few feet away from me. I started crying now, scared out of my mind. I feel like maybe it has to be a ghost. I grew up with scary ghost stories, courtesy of my dad, and I'm convinced now that I'm in a room with a ghost, and then she, or whatever this was, proceeded to call my name again. Then, there was a second voice. Definitely not my grandmother's. It was deep, definitely more masculine, and absolutely terrifying, as it shouted,
"Come to the front door."
I did not do that. Instead, I made sure to run back to my grandmother's bedroom, lock the door, and pick up the telephone on their nightstand. I called my own home phone, and my dad's sleepy voice answered. Through a barely comprehensible voice, I managed to croak something like, "Daddy, there's someone in the house, and I can't find Grandma. She's gone." My dad, of course, said that he jumped out of bed, grabbed his Swiss Army knife that he kept in the drawer next to the bed, and ran down the road to the house in his PJs and bare feet. He ran up to the front door, jingled the handle. It was locked, so he made his way around, and since he knew the garage code, he just punched it in and got inside. A quick sweep of the 3 rooms of the home, and it showed that no one was in there. It's not like there was really anywhere else to hide. I ran out of the room once I was sure that he was there and began bawling in his arms. He kept reassuring me that no one was here, and then asked if I did know where Grandma was possibly. I said I hadn't and explained that I had woken up from her calling for Samson, but she hadn't been anywhere there. This was back when cell phones were definitely around, but there were no iPhones, and my grandmother certainly wouldn't have been buying them anyway. My dad had one, but not on him at the time. I could tell that he was trying to keep calm, so he just said that we need to go back to our house. I was sure he was probably going to call the police at that point, just because my grandmother still hadn't popped up, and her car had been in the garage when he got in. If she'd left, she'd gone on foot. We hadn't even made it 2 steps out of the driveway when from my grandma's neighbor's house, my grandma was strolling out, chatting to our neighbor. She saw my dad and then me, crying my eyes out, and immediately ran over to see what was wrong. She was super apologetic. She said that she'd stepped out right when she'd heated up her soup to go see her neighbor, who called about looking at something my grandmother was going to buy. My grandmother had figured that I was asleep and that she'd only be gone for about 10 or 15 minutes. At first, people may have assumed I was feverish, therefore delusional, but I still stand by what happened. I know for a fact I was definitely alone in the house, save for Samson, but the voices that I heard were real. For a while, I was hesitant to go back to my grandmother's house because this happened in the middle of the day. I later read some stories at school about Wendigos, creatures that would disguise their voices to lure people. This was the closest explanation that I could ever form about what I heard. I never shared to anyone that I thought that it was for sure a Wendigo and just chalked it up to maybe it just being a ghost. I'm close to my 20s now. Last year was the first time I shared this story fully with my grandpa, who used to just say that fever must have made me had bad dreams. We were sitting on the front porch of the house, smoking cigarettes and exchanging anecdotes. When I finished telling him, for the first time he looked sort of disturbed about it. He finally put his cigarette out and just stared out into the road. Then he cleared his throat, looked over at me. "You know," he said slowly, "some funny things used to happen around that time, in the middle of the night. I'd wake up to take a piss or something. When I'd first get up out of bed, I could hear your grandma sleeping away, snoring." He chuckled, but his face grew serious again. "Anyways, I'd always hear her calling for the dog. I tried to remain looking calm, but my voice still shook as I asked him, even when she was sleeping? Sleep talking? No." He shook his head. "I heard her call from outside. Maybe the living room. I don't know, honey. She'd call for the dog. She'd call my name, all while she was really sleeping next to me, sleeping like a baby." "Have you ever told anyone?" "No, I don't want to scare her. She's real scared of the idea, like ghosts and stuff. That's why when you were younger, and that thing happened, I told her just remember you've been sick. Fever and all. Probably have nightmares." He looked gravely at me. "Don't repeat this to her, please, honey. She's really not the type of being scared." Of course, I wanted to cry. I had this itchy, creepy feeling suddenly about being at that house. "Grandpa, do you still hear it sometimes?" "Oh, yes." He was now reaching into his breast pocket to get out another cigarette. "Every night. But you just gotta remember not to do what it says. Even the dog figured it out. If it says to come to the door, you stay away from that door. If it says, I don't know, come here, you just stay still in that room until it quits calling." With that, he asked to borrow my lighter. Again,